What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you our 10,000 subscribers Q&A that I mentioned like a weekish ago in the community section. So, right off the bat, this is me. This is my face. This actually isn't something I mind doing in terms of like actually showing my face. I know some YouTubers are like real weird about it being like a face reveal. This is purely an editing decision for me. It is just easier for me to edit videos very quickly if I don't choose to put my face in them, simply because it just adds more editing time. Plus, I don't really have the setup, as you probably noticed. There's probably a big light issue on some of this, but like hopefully you guys can see for the most part, because I didn't want to do like a regular video for this. With that out of the way, obviously this is because we hit 10K subs, so I just want to start out by saying just thank you guys tremendously. I've been on YouTube for coming up on 6 years in October, actually, and probably like late last year and all of this year, basically. The channel has just finally started to blow up and just get a ton of views and everything, and 10K subs is a big milestone for a lot of reasons, which we will get into towards the end of this video, because for right now, I promised you guys an unmonetized QA, and that's what we're going to do. So, to start it out here, Sir Borkton asks, how do you perceive your channel? Do you feel it's more of a hobby, or rather a part-time job or gig? Perhaps you might even feel it's a full-time job. Well, it's definitely a full-time job in terms of hours spent. So, I have an actual full-time job that I work 5 days a week, and then I spend probably 40 hours playing and editing like video game footage and stuff for this channel. Plus, I'm actually a father as well. I have my son about half the week, so like that's why early in the week I don't usually get a chance to post anything. Actually, most everything I do is done on like Wednesday evening through Sunday morning. Like that's where all of it happens. So in terms of like money and everything being brought in, it's probably more of like a part-time job. It's like a third paycheck a month at this point. So, moving right along, Ed Raffenskald Conway. I'm going to butcher some of these names, by the way. If you've watched the channel at all, pronunciation is just not my game. But he asks, favorite character you've played in any game? So, I'm actually going to throw a bit of a curveball at you guys, because as I imagine, most people know me for my CRPGs, and you might think the character would be from one of those, but no, it is actually Balthier from Final Fantasy XII. Absolutely love that guy. Like, everything about him is awesome. A close second would be Jahan from Divinity Original Sin 2. Well, just the Divinity series in general, really, at this point, but Original Sin 1 and Original Sin 2. Now, next up, we have Lahel Kiss. Is there a reason you don't do Let's Plays on your channel? If yes, what is it? And if I can ask from the game, in Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, does the Cross-Blooded lose anything that the base class gets? So, I'll have to look into the Cross-Blooded thing. I don't honestly remember offhand. And as for Let's Plays, it's mostly just that I don't like them. Let's Plays are kind of a pain for me, just because of the way I play video games. As you guys might imagine, with the way I 100% games, I just tear through games. And it's to the point where like it's hard to sit down and like cut that into videos for me. And as a result, I don't really enjoy doing Let's Plays, but I will talk about that more at the end of this video, actually, where I'm going to discuss like future plans, because I want to do something Let's Play-like in the future, hopefully, once we get there. But that's more or less the reason why. Next up, we have a Russian username I'm not even going to try to pronounce, who asks, which element do you look out for the most in an RPG? Combat, build, story, dialogue, etc. For me, it's primarily story, builds, and like character progression. Like, how can I build the character I want to play, and is there a variety of builds that allow me to do that? And at the same time, I also need the story to be compelling. Those are probably the two main things for me personally. When it comes to dialogue, I've mentioned this a few times. I don't really care about voice acting and stuff, but I actually, more often than not, don't play with like dialogue type sounds on. Simply because, well, I used to be an artilleryman in the army, so sometimes, like, sounds and stuff, especially, like, voices, I can't always just hear them anyway. So usually what I'll do is just turn subtitles on and just turn, like, just ambiguous sounds off, which is a little weird, but that's where we are. So basically, story, builds, and character progression. Now, next up, Rom RPG asks, what is your favorite CRPG mechanic? Each game seems to have their own thing. Just curious if any of them stood out in particular. So, for me, I would actually say Wasteland 3's Kodiak, which is like the vehicle you move around the world map in and everything, and you get to like customize it as far as like what it looks like, what it sounds like, all the weapons and stuff that are on it. And then in random encounters, as well as certain maps, you can actually use the Kodiak just like as another party member, which I thought was really cool. That's probably like my favorite individual mechanic from Wasteland 3. So just kind of CRPGs in general. That's probably like the one I like the most. Just to give you a little bit extra, the one that stands out the most is Kingmaker's Kingdom Management System, because I didn't enjoy it. MoomudShazwan, I'm sorry, again, gonna butcher these names, asks, would you do any top 10 CRPG games that are must play? Anything on a future venture or other genre like horrors or JRPG? Or would you try the challenge to 100% any soul-like genre? So from the top, would I do any top 10 CRPGs? I plan on doing so. I'm probably going to do one more towards like the end of this year, because there's a lot of CRPGs coming out this year that I want to play. And I feel like if I did one right now, I'd wind up just having to do it again in the future anyway. So I really want to get those games out of the way and then kind of do one towards the end of the year, actually, was my genuine plan on that front. Anything on a future venture into other genres like horror or JRPG? I kind of venture into other genres just for like the reviews after 100%, because the reviews after 100% are honestly just any game I find interesting, not just CRPGs, because otherwise I'd be limiting myself quite a bit there. So in that regard, yeah. As far as like full-time coverage, not so much. And then, would you try the challenge to 100% any Souls-like genre? Probably not, just because I don't actually really like Souls-like games. I just don't care for them much. They're not really my thing. I've played a few of them here and there on console, like, friends have actually owned the games. I'm just not wild about them. Like, they're definitely good. I can see the appeal and why, people in general would like them, but they're just not for me. Next up, ExpressGaming asks, who are you really? Answer as you feel comfortable. I am a secret agent. No, I don't know, man. I'm a guy who likes to play video games. I grew up super poor. I was actually homeless for a couple years in high school. I got on my feet, and, growing up being that poor, computers were always like this thing that was just out of reach for me. So I just kind of did everything I could possibly do with them. I actually self-taught how to build PCs, just all that jazz. Actually went to school at one point, like vocational school, to learn how to do like IT management and stuff, which is not actually, ironically enough, what I do now, but it is what I went to school for. I was eventually able to get on my feet, obviously, but that's pretty much it. I'm just a guy who loves video games for the most part. So next up, we have Subway to Venus asking, what is our favorite game genre besides CRPGs, and do I play tabletop games at all? If so, what's your favorite moment from a session? So my favorite game genre besides CRPGs would probably just be like third-person RPG type things like The Witcher 3, to be honest. Pretty much any third-person game, RPG style, like The Witcher 3, the recently released Biomutant, like that camera angle, as long as like an RPG. Skyrim type games would be a great one. So mostly stuff like that. And then, do I play tabletops at all? So not so much anymore. I used to more so in high school. My favorite moment from a session, that's a bit of a story. I had actually just started playing a game in my adult life. This is years back, mind you, with a few of my friends, and our like first quest, if you will, was to like remove a ghost from this haunted like opera house, and we were trying to puzzle out what exactly like this ghost was there for. And we had like gathered up a bunch of its possessions, and like after a little while of not being able to just figure out what we needed to do to make this ghost happy and go away the right way, I decided to just like fireball it. I was playing a wizard. Fireball, or firebolt, I guess technically, the ghost's possessions. So it went from like this fun little puzzle adventure to now we have to fight this way over leveled ghost for our level 1 party. So that was a thing that happened. I always got a big kick out of that. I remember that pretty fondly. Dai K asks, do you get beta accesses for being a bigger channel, or how big were you when, if it started? So, complicated question, actually. Sometimes I'll get invited to closed betas, and I assume purely that's because of the size of the channel at this point with 10K subs. How big I was when I started getting invited to closed betas just in general, probably 4,000 or 5,000 subs is when I first got my like initial invitations to things because of the channel. But I will mention that closed betas and stuff, I like to often take the money I make on YouTube and like roll that back into Kickstarter campaigns and stuff, usually at a level that would give me closed beta access, simply because, you know, then I can make content for the channel out of it and also support the development of a game I think is going to be interesting. So it's kind of a little mix of both of those things, really. It does occasionally happen, though. Dzikri Pratama only has one question. How do you avoid gaming burnout? Do you take a few days off, switch genre or something? Both. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I can't really deal with content like Sunday through Wednesday because I have my son. Like I can do a little bit here and there, but just not anything substantial. So in that way, I actually do take a few days off here and there, of course. For my reviews after 100%, those games are usually different genres than just CRPG, which definitely helps me diversify things a little bit, which is intentional. I try not to play the same type of game back to back to back. That's why I don't just do like review after 100% for CRPG and then another CRPG. Usually it's like two separate game types. So for instance, I did Biomutant and then I did Solasta, which were two very different genres. So I'll do stuff like that to kind of mix it up. Belfalor asks, what got you into YouTube? My favorite game of all time. My big dream at the moment. Also says, love the channel, man. Only found you recently. Love the reviews. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. What got me into YouTube? In 2015, I was working what felt like at the time a dead-end job that would actually turn into a weird career in like the year after that. But at the time, it was just the dullest job I've ever had. It was boring, and I wanted to do something where I could express myself creatively and basically just not be bored to death every moment of my life. So I started making YouTube videos because, you know, I would watch gaming YouTube videos, of course. So I was like, man, I feel like I could do that. And then I did it really poorly for several years. And then finally it started to catch on. My favorite game of all time, Divinity Original Sin 2, hands down. God, I love that game. My big dream at the moment, honestly, is to just do this full time. I put an insane amount of work into this channel, and to see it finally start to pay off is a big deal, of course. But my big dream, honestly, is to just do this, but as a full-time job. Next up, we have Aaron Joyner, who is asking us, are you going to post live streams or walkthroughs of CRPGs you are reviewing? Short answer, yes, but I'll talk more about that at the end of the video. All right, next up, we have John Smith asking, exactly how many games have you 100%ed? So for the Steam metric, 34. If you count console games I played before I really started doing it in like a quantifiable metric, honestly, I don't know. Like I played a few games on consoles and stuff before I started this YouTube channel that I definitely 100%ed, but I'm going to go ahead and say 34 because that's what I can verify on Steam. Next up, we have Mitchell Viola asking, what is your favorite CRPG and non-CRPG? So favorite CRPG, Divinity Original Sin 2, fantastic game. My favorite non-CRPG. That's a tough one. There's a lot of great non-CRPGs. Truthfully, I've probably spent the most hours in Skyrim, so that's kind of what I want to say. But I probably enjoyed The Witcher 3 more than Skyrim. But then again, other smaller titles like Vampire and stuff are really near and dear to me as well. But if I had to pick an answer for my favorite non-CRPG, it'd probably be The Witcher 3. Next up, Alessandro Bacaletti asks, do you think CRPGs have completed their resurrection? Do you expect them to slowly die or keep growing? What kind of evolution do you expect from future games? New settings, completely new systems and mechanics? What do you think about fantasy settings that CRPGs, in my opinion, seem to be too reliant on? Always different iterations of the exact same token D&D thing? what are some games you really like outside of the CRPG genre? Quite a lot to break down there, but first of all, let me say thanks to Alessandro here for asking this question, because this question was actually the inspiration for a video that may have went up already by the time this does, talking about the future of CRPGs as a genre. So I believe they've completed their resurrection. CRPGs are alive and well. They are honestly doing better than I've ever seen them in my life. As for whether or not I expect them to slowly die or keep growing, I think that's really up to the devs at this point. So, in my opinion, one of the reasons CRPGs died to begin with is because it became really stagnant. A lot of those early games felt very similar. And I think if devs can keep pushing the learning curve with their complicated systems, like putting in better tutorials, that kind of thing, along with coming up with new ways to present their ideas in the format, then I think it'll keep growing. Otherwise, I think it's going to fall off kind of in the way battle royales have kind of like slowly calmed down a little bit. Now, for what kind of evolution do you expect from future games, such as new settings, completely new systems, and mechanics? Honestly, I think settings is a given. I think most games are going to try to mix up the settings, so definitely going to see that going forward. As far as the new systems and mechanics specifically, I would honestly expect some sort of mechanic that would expand what they're able to do with choice and consequence, because right now a big limiting just reagent for any kind of game at this point is just the amount of work involved in presenting choice and consequence, which is why I think systems and mechanics that address that problem are going to probably blow up at some point, which is probably a good time to mention the Nemesis system that was in Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War. That's an amazing system that I think it was Warner Brothers who did it, actually copyrighted. So a system like that could inherently just mix up all sorts of choice and consequence for something like a CRPG. Like, I think that would be an incredible system to mix. But because companies, being big companies, and copywriting things, I'm not 100% positive we'll ever see a widespread growth of that until like things like those copyrights just fade into obscurity, or they just start understanding that it's better for everyone if they just open that sort of thing up. But to answer your question a little more succinctly, I think they are eventually going to find mechanics that make implementing choice and consequence easier. What that actually looks like would be hard for me to say. What do I think about fantasy settings that CRPGs, in your opinion, seem to be too reliant on? I mean, I like fantasy settings. Like, medieval fantasy is my jam. Like, I just love medieval fantasy type stuff. Swords, magic, like knights and demons and stuff. Like, it's so campy, I admit. But God, I love that stuff. That said, yeah, it's an oversaturated market for sure. Never going to argue with anybody on that. It's very overdone, which is why games that are trying to do something different, which, I mean, I'm not going to name names here because I've done it several times, but there are developers trying to mix that up. So, hopefully we'll see some more diversity on that front soon. And what are some games I really like outside of the CRPG genre? Well, as I mentioned earlier, I love Skyrim. I actually love The Witcher 3. Vampire was an amazing one. Biomutant, which, I don't know, people got the impression from that review I didn't like that game, but I loved Biomutant. What a weird, fun game. That was a blast. Stuff like that. And believe it or not, I actually love action RPGs, like in general. Diablo, Diablo 2, kind of Diablo 3, but, that game was The Torchlight series, I'm actually a big fan of ARPGs, so just definitely some of those. All right, next up, Mark Zakaria asks, why not include number of hours played as well so we can gauge the length of the game for someone who's also somewhat of a completionist? I know as someone that's busy, I'd personally like that kind of info. I'm assuming you're talking about my reviews after 100%. And a less dry question, do you prefer the older era of CRPGs or the newer ones after 2013? I know I relish in the ambitious mechanics and features of the new games, but going back and seeing what was accomplished in the late 90s, early 2000s is also great. To answer your first question, I'll think about it. I'll probably include the hours played at some point. I will say that some people have asked me here and there about including specifics about the achievements, but personally I haven't noticed much of an interest in like the actual specifics of what I had to do for each achievement. But hours played, yeah, I might start mentioning that. As for your second question, Do I prefer the older era of CRPGs? For the most part, by and large, I prefer this kind of resurrected golden era that we're in right now, simply because of all the ambitious mechanics and just all this new stuff they're trying to do. However, I will say some of my favorites are from that earlier period, like Planescape Torment is just one of my favorites across the board. There's just a lot of classics from that area, so while they aren't necessarily as ambitious mechanically, yeah, there's some great stories there that I really enjoy. So that said, if I had to pick, honestly, the newer generation, just because they're just more mechanically interesting. Next up, Havoc asks, hobbies are frequent activities outside of video games, YouTube. Yard work, actually, which sounds ridiculous, but I like working in my yard. I like building things, actually. I built my own like dining room table. I built a patio out behind my house that's like a 12 by 12. I actually just like building stuff. PCs, just anything really. So games are my passion, obviously, but I just like putting stuff together. So anything that allows me to do that is usually something I'll look into. Next up, we have MDQ asking for face reveal. Most hated CRPG, favorite CRPG, most anticipated RPG, first RPG. Face reveal. This is my face. Most hated CRPG. Ooh, hated. That's interesting. I wouldn't say there's ever really been a CRPG that I've hated. I will say that Kingmaker's kingdom management system is the worst. I hate that system. I have a real love-hate relationship with Pathfinder Kingmaker, and that's probably about as close as I could get to a most hated CRPG. Favorite CRPG, Divinity Original Sin 2 again. Most anticipated. As of right now, Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. That's shaping up to be an incredible game. That's probably the thing I'm looking forward to the absolute most. And first RPG. Well, the very first RPG that I ever finished on my own from start to finish was Final Fantasy VII when I was 7. Next up, we have a question from Andy. When are you going to check out Underrail? This is a question Andy asks me frequently. When I get to it. I don't know, man. It's on my list. I'll get to it eventually. Next up, we have Dante Bior. Which software house that today does not exist anymore that you miss the most? It can also be a living software house that today has been bought by someone else. Cough, cough, BioWare, cough, cough. I'm assuming from the context clues you're asking me which developer that no longer exists that I miss the most. If I had to pick one, I'd probably say Pandemic Studios. They just had a lot of really interesting hits, and then they were just driven into the ground the second they stopped being useful, and I think that's a shame. I would have liked to have seen what they did in the future. The other, more of a hot take one, Blizzard. Actually, I used to love Blizzard games. I love Diablo 2, and you look at what they've done since Activision took them over, and it's just an absolute shit show. Second to last, we have Edgar Jovaka, who asks, do you have a cat? Yes, I do, as you've probably heard and seen throughout this video. Come here. Oh, or not. She refuses to get it up in my lap. But yes, I have a cat that is actively running around. And then our last question is from Nicholas Osuna, who asks, again, favorite CRPG, and again, Divinity Original Sin 2. All right, so that's it for the questions and answers. Honestly, thank you for everybody who asked a question, because when I actually made that post, I was like, man, I hope people actually ask questions. I was a little worried I was going to make that post and everyone was just going to be completely silent. And I was like, wow, how awkward would that be? But now I just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about future plans for the channel and everything. And basically, as of right now, the thing that having 10,000 subscribers allows you to do just right off the bat is it allows you to link your merchandise store with your actual YouTube channel. That's how YouTubers get that little merch shelf below their videos. So that right off the bat is something I'll be able to do now, which hopefully will increase revenue a bit. On top of the fact that having subscribers in the 5 digits ultimately just means more revenue. So right now, as it stands, I make a little less than $1,000 every month on YouTube, which helps me pay basically everything besides my mortgage. Now, going forward, I'm very much so looking into going part-time at work. Now, from this point, the point that I'm actually making this video from, I need to give it a little time, basically. I need to see where exactly that stuff lands. I also need to get a couple things, like insurance-wise, sorted out. But basically what I'm trying to do right now is look into going from working 5 days a week down to 4 days a week, because YouTube is already giving me enough money to cover that. YouTube factually pays most of my bills besides my mortgage right now, and then I just pocket the rest. So that's kind of my goal as far as spending more time on the content. And then from there, to answer a few of the other questions that were actually asked here in more depth, what I plan on doing with that extra time is a couple of things. One, obviously just working on more videos, right? But if I can actually give myself a little more time during the week, what I'd like to do is, while I'm working on games, to review them after 100%, maybe like stream here and there, like while I'm working on that game. So kind of do things like that, which might turn into like a Let's Play thing if I get more comfortable. But truthfully, I'm not super comfortable with streaming, which, I mean, I imagine if I do it more, I'd probably get more comfortable with it, which is kind of the idea in general. But as it stands right now, those are kind of the big things I'm focused on. Is now that I have a more stable situation, I guess you could call it, on YouTube, I plan on trying to start transitioning from my regular job to YouTube more as YouTube grows more. So that's kind of what I'm working on in the immediate future, which is probably going to take like 6-ish months. So that's kind of where we stand right now. Going forward, you can largely expect mostly the same content, outside of if I do manage to step back from working as much to start doing like the streams and things like I mentioned. But beyond that, we're looking forward to a few CRPGs releasing this year as well, so I'll be covering those. If anything comes up this year that hasn't already been announced, I guess I'll go from there. E3 is right around the corner, so there might be some shakeups there, but that's kind of what we're looking at. As it stands, this is already looking to be a fairly long video of me just talking. So with that out of the way, guys, truly cannot thank you enough. 10K subs, man. Holy crap. I remember when that was just like a pipe dream. So I just cannot thank you guys enough. I literally couldn't have done it without you. Thank you. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.